Hello Internet, my name is Cannowell, I have a GM's Guide, and this is that GM's Guide, but instead of regular, it's on YouTube. This is the first one of these that I've recorded since getting some feedback, so hopefully the audio balance will be more better on this one. I'm definitely a lot better at writing than I am at voice acting or video editing, so the superior version of this guide is the written version, which you can find linked in the description. I'm really just recording these for people who greatly prefer to listen to something instead of read it, because I figure that even a kind of crappy recording is going to be better than a really good writing for those kinds of people. So, today we're talking about the art of encounters. What is an encounter? An encounter is a series of actions resolved with rules and rulings strung together around overcoming the opposition to a specific goal. It's one scene of the story. It begins with a question and it ends with an answer. If there's no significant opposition to the goal, there's no obstacle to overcome, no actions to take to overcome it, and the player can just say, I do a thing, and you say the thing is done, and it's over. No need for an encounter for that. On the other hand, if there's no goal, then it's not worth spending time on. Players may fight monsters for no other reason except that you put someone in front of them, but they'll get bored with that about as quickly as they'll get bored with being forced to describe their unopposed hike from one town to another in excruciating detail. This is why Monte Cook's Shortest Possible Adventure has both an orc and a pie. You need at least one complete encounter for an adventure, so the world's smallest adventure is exactly one encounter with only the absolutely necessary elements. A goal, the pie, and opposition, the orc. As a corollary to this, whenever the players face opposition to their goals, they should have an encounter. Don't let them slide past an obstacle without actually confronting it. It's a waste of good drama. The question that begins an encounter might be something like, will the party get past these marauding orcs alive? Or it might be something entirely different, like, which members of the Lord's Alliance, if any, are willing to commit forces to combating this month's apocalypse? The former is a wilderness combat encounter, might even be random. The latter is a council meeting and probably critical to the plot, but both of them begin with a question. Likewise, both of them end as soon as possible, as soon as the question is answered. In screenwriting, they call this principle in late, out early, and it applies to most kinds of fiction, including role-playing. Pace is greatly improved when you start a scene at the moment it becomes interesting and end it at the moment the conclusion is obvious. If it's become clear that the orcs are going to lose, or if it's become clear which members of the Alliance are going to help the party's cause, it's time to wrap up. Even if the orcs have some hit points left, or there's still some formalities to go through before the Alliance's support is official. A good way to do this with combat is you can have monsters begin to flee. Some players are really bloodthirsty and will want to track them down and kill them to a man, and if they want to do that, then that's fine, that's their choice. But if the players just want to keep on moving, they're satisfied with just having won the encounter, then just have the orcs run away when it's clear they're going to lose, and the players can decide whether or not they want to chase them. The filling in the middle of the encounter is there to give the players input on the question. The more important the question is to the overall plot, the more input the players need to have. From the standpoint of realism alone, it would make enough sense to resolve a mass combat with the fate of the entire kingdom hanging in the balance with just one opposed intelligence check. The commander of the goblin army rolls their intelligence, and the commander of the player's army rolls their intelligence, and whoever gets the higher result, they win the battle, maybe with some modifiers thrown in for one side or another having more or better troops or whatever. You can do that, and it's not like an intelligence check is so well defined that it wouldn't be realistic. What does realistic even mean in context of an intelligence check? But just because it would be realistic doesn't mean it would make for a good game. It wouldn't be compelling. It would not be satisfying for such a pivotal moment to come down to one die roll. If the players succeed, it'll feel anticlimactic. And if the players fail, they'll feel like they were never given a chance to succeed. Once again, the converse is also true. Players don't want to spend dozens of die rolls on opening up a chest with a few dozen silver inside, where the only bad thing that happens if they fail is they get shot with a dart for 1d4 damage. It's not important, so spending so much time on it feels wrong, even if not carefully knocking aside each individual tumbler on the lock could technically be represented by a whole bunch of checks all in a row. The length of an encounter comes down to more than just the amount of die rolls made or the time spent on it. Spending some time expositing on the battle before telling the players the results of their one die roll will help make it a little bit less anticlimactic, but not much. Likewise, making 3 different die rolls for 3 distinct stages of the battle Like you start at the walls of a castle and then you move into the courtyard and finally you have the final confrontation in the keep. Well, that'll help make the encounter seem like a bigger deal, but it won't give the players any more feeling of control. It's still just 3 die rolls. Good description and NPC acting can be used to liven up an encounter for sure, and we'll talk about that more when we get to more specific encounter types. But to really get players engaged, you need to give them a game to play, and that means giving them interesting choices to make. Many encounter types have a pre-existing structure that presents interesting choices automatically. Combat is usually the only one of these that's present in the game rules themselves, but most GMs quickly come up with structures of their own for common encounter types. I'll get into some of mine later on, and feel free to steal them. I didn't make up any of mine from scratch. If you're dealing with an encounter that doesn't have a pre-existing structure, you can use a general purpose system to paper things over. Now, general purpose systems always pay a price in effectiveness for their flexibility, so if you notice yourself using the same general purpose system for the same sort of encounter a lot, you should try to come up with a more specific system. The general purpose system that we're going to be talking about today is the one that's generally caught on with the RPG community, and that is skill challenges. Generally speaking, it shouldn't take more than 5 minutes to resolve a single decision point, usually less, and if the players are spending more than 5 minutes on a single decision, it's probably a good idea to hurry them along. Anytime a conversation about a single decision goes on for more than 5 minutes, it's usually going in circles, and it's just going to kill the pace. So push the players to make a decision immediately. That means that 1 or 2 decision points gives you at most 5 to 10 minutes of action, equivalent to a very quick combat encounter for conflicts that do need resolution, but are not very important. For example, opening a trap chest has 1, maybe 2 rolls, each of which has some kind of interesting decision attached to it related to how the players open the chest. For example, are they opening it from front or behind? In the first case, they may need to actually disable the trap. In the second case, if the poison dart is shooting in the wrong direction because they're opening the chest from behind, then they may not actually need to roll at all, and that's fine. Sometimes making the right choice in a decision point eliminates the need for a roll entirely. But in the example of the trap chest, the worst that can happen is that the trap goes off and saps a little bit of HP, like 1d4. And the best is that the party gets the treasure with no damage. That's not a big deal either way, so keep it quick. 3 to 6 decision points is going to be in the neighborhood of 15 to 30 minutes, which is about how long the average combat encounter takes. This works well for encounters like a chase scene, or infiltrating a masquerade ball disguised as guests or servants, where the importance of the plot is about the same as any given rumble with the Dark Lord's goon squad. 7 or more decision points means you are reasonably likely to take over half an hour. At 12 decision points, maybe even a full hour, and something that long should have similar weight to a climactic boss encounter, like escaping a collapsing doom temple after removing the magical doohickey that was keeping it up. So what exactly is a decision point? Its ultimate purpose, of course, is to be a point at which the players must make a decision, which will influence the outcome of the encounter. But how does that work? First, you need to come up with a decision to make. In the Escape the Collapsing Doom Temple example, players might be faced with a collapsing hallway, and you can offer the choice to sprint straight through the bricks and hope to stay ahead of them on raw speed, or else analyze where they're falling and weave between the collapsing points. The former would be an athletics check, while the latter would be investigation, or maybe acrobatics. Now, you may have noticed that I am basically just robbing Matt Colville blind from his video on skill challenges, and yeah, I am. I'm going to link that in the description, and you can watch that for more information. A clever player might come up with some novel way to approach the problem that you hadn't anticipated. Maybe this is just a superior way of taking one of the options you thought of, allowing them to roll the same skill with advantage, for example. A player uses a class feature to rocket jump down the hallway in order to get advantage on the athletics check to stay ahead of the collapsing bricks. Maybe they have some kind of class feature that lets them flat out ignore the problem, like a class with any kind of short-range teleport just zapping themselves to the end of the hallway. Maybe they can think of a way to use a different skill to solve the problem, like using Mage Hand to toss bricks, which each individually weigh less than the 5-pound limit of the spell, out of the way. This allows them to roll Arcana instead of Investigation or Athletics. If you think that's a stretch, you might require them to roll a disadvantage, and if you think it's particularly brilliant, you might let them roll at advantage. And if you don't think it'd be particularly more or less effective than running down the hall, let them roll normally. Don't feel like you have to reward players with advantage for coming up with clever solutions unless their solution really is much better than any of the ones you thought of in advance. Being able to roll one of their stronger skills is already a reward for being clever. Contrarily, don't feel the need to punish players for thinking outside the box either. Your default really should be to let them roll normally, and an advantage or disadvantage should only be applied if it's a really good idea or if it's really a stretch to apply that skill to this situation. Okay, so what happens if players fail a check at a decision point? The generalist nature of this one-size-fits-all system means that making the mechanics work will sometimes break the narrative and vice versa. Although it's counterintuitive, being the opposite of things like the make a ruling and move on advice when you can't remember a rule, in this case, it's better to make the mechanics work and use narration to justify the result. Specifically, if more players succeed than fail, give the players a point. And if more fail than succeed, subtract a point. And if they have a positive number of points at the end, then they win. This keeps things simple, which makes it easy to keep the pace up. It might not make perfect sense that the party's speed in escaping a collapsing Doom Temple is an average of their results rather than being dragged down by everyone having to wait up for the slowest member or else abandon them. But a simple generalist system was never going to make perfect sense for a specific situation. That's why we like having specific systems. Players probably won't notice the scene if you keep things moving fast enough to be exciting, and even if they do, they're less likely to care if the escape seems thrilling in any case. So just keep it simple and keep the pace up. Some groups will blow through these decision points faster than 5 minutes apiece, especially in situations like the escape the collapsing Doom Temple example, where it's easy for you to find excuses to pressure them into choosing fast. And some groups will also go through combat encounters like a fine-tuned machine, each player immediately ready to act on their turn and knowing exactly which dice to roll and what modifiers to add when they do so. The point of more decision points is not to make the encounter take more table time, but rather to give the players plenty of opportunities to give real input so that their victory or defeat will feel earned. Don't feel the need to stretch things out if a climactic encounter regularly clock in under 20 minutes. So long as those 20 minutes are exciting and feel appropriately climactic, it's all good. For the rest of this section, I'm going to give advice on running 4 particular kinds of encounters, the ones that most often crop up in a game: combat, chase, stealth, and social. At least a couple of those are going to have videos all to themselves, maybe all 4 of them. We'll see when we get there. Before we get into it though, it's important to note that you as a GM do not set up combat, chase, stealth, social, or any other kind of encounter in advance. You set up opposition, and players choose how to engage with that opposition. Sometimes certain options just aren't available, like you can't negotiate with mindless undead, and you can't sneak your way into winning the respect of the proud warrior race guy. But you shouldn't design opposition specifically to have only one possible solution. You should not design a combat encounter. You should design an encounter, some opposition, and let the players decide what kind of encounter to have with it. Now it's important to keep that in mind because there's another definition of encounter in a D&D context, which is an individual unit of opposition. For example, if there's a group of orcs with an Eye of Groomsh in one room of a dungeon, people might call writing those guys up and putting them in that dungeon room designing an encounter, and they're not wrong. I did it purely by accident just a little bit ago, went off script for 2 words. When you put a bunch of orcs and an Eye of Groomsh in a dungeon, you are designing opposition that may be encountered, and it's not unreasonable to call that designing an encounter. Now for clarity's sake, I'm going to try to refer to it as designing opposition, although I did slip up, and I'm on my 4th take on this, so I don't want to do it again. The important thing is that that opposition needs to be ready to be part of any type of encounter. We'll talk about designing good combat opposition in one section and good stealth opposition in another section and so on, but that's not because you should be thinking of a specific pack of orcs as a combat encounter. You should make a pack of orcs suitable for a combat, stealth, social, or any other kind of encounter that the players have. Next time, we'll be talking about combat encounters specifically, how to build them mechanically, and how to run them narratively. I'll see you there.